What love was like for Vikings. Ek elska pik. If one was to say I love you in Old Norse, you would say ek elska pik. Romantic love played an important role in Viking society and was greatly encouraged. We tend to think of Vikings as warriors and brutal raiders. However, they had rich family ties and developed love lives just like any other culture. The importance of marriage. Viking marriages were normally arranged by the parents according to the station and political or economic needs. However, once the partner was selected, mutual romance and sexual passion were expected to develop. Marriages were often used to bring feuding clans together or increase cooperation between them. The prospective bride and groom were advised on the matter, but they did not have the final say on the matter. Every upstanding Viking, whether male or female, was expected to get married and produce a male heir. If they refused to do so, they would be considered impaired and treated as social outcasts. The mighty passion. We tend to think of arranged marriages as loveless or unromantic. However, the Vikings viewed it differently. Once the families had agreed to a marriage, the customs and rituals that followed aimed to stir up romantic love and sexual passion between the two prospective partners. Cultivation of what the Vikings called the mighty passion included meeting and getting to know each other. It could include the man picking flowers for his prospective bride. Meanwhile, the female was expected to demonstrate her homemaking capabilities by making clothing for a future husband. The courtship period was very delicate and had to last a reasonable amount of time. If either side tried to delay the marriage, it was considered to be an insulting rejection, while shortening it significantly was seen as disrespectful. Hygiene and courting. Hygiene was not particularly well developed in the medieval era. However, the Vikings were an exception to this rule. When courting a member of the opposite sex, attention to hygiene was considered crucial. To attract a mate in Norse culture, one had to maintain a relatively high level of hygiene. Vikings washed their face and combed their hair daily. They would also bathe weekly, a practice which shocked their Saxon and Frankish enemies. Viking women paid a great deal of attention to their hair, which was considered central to the power of feminine allure. Long and fair hair was the ideal of beauty, and obtaining it was essential to attracting a mate and maintaining social status. Norse culture also emphasized the importance of clothing. Colorful and extravagant patterns were considered signs of social status. Men of means also wore a great deal of jewelry on their person. When courting, one was expected to wear the most extravagant clothing possible. Romance and marriage. On the night of marriage, the bride and groom would toast to the gods with a special bridal ale sweetened through the addition of a prodigious amount of honey. They were then provided with enough of the sweet brew to last an entire month. This custom is the origin of the term honeymoon. Indeed, we carry over many of the marriage traditions of the Vikings. Couples would exchange rings and the husband would carry his wife over the threshold. Husbands and wife would often share the same drinking horn at dinner as a show of their affection. It was considered perfectly acceptable for the wife to sit on her husband's lap or for the wife to stroke her man's hair as he reclined in her lap. Monogamy or lack thereof. Sex before marriage was not encouraged, but it did not suffer the same taboo it did in other culture. A woman who was not a virgin would not suffer from lower stature as a potential mate, as long as she had been relatively discreet and had not borne children. Viking males were not required to be monogamous to their wives. It was their duty to have children with their wives, but they could and often had children with other women as well. It was quite common for a man to live with his mistress or regularly have intercourse with his slaves, male or female, while married. The one major taboo was that a Viking male should never sleep with another man's wife on penalty of death. However, women were not powerless in marriage. They had a right to obtain a divorce from their husband if they were abused, neglected or not satisfied sexually. Viking culture was rich and included so much more than just violence and drinking. The notion of romance and love were very powerful. Every couple that goes on honeymoon pays tribute to the ancient Norse people. Now let's go over some facts a little deeper. Sex before marriage was acceptable. It wasn't always possible to marry the one you loved or lusted after. The saga makes constant reference to the illicit love visit. In such cases, a young couple forbidden from marrying would meet in secret. The sagas never mention sex occurring. However, it is highly unlikely the young man would risk a secret tryst simply to talk to the object of his affections. The lovers, however, were said to enjoy each other, and document detailing a wife's dissatisfaction with her impotent husband because she couldn't enjoy him suggest this is a term linked to sexual fulfillment. Indeed, although female virginity was ideal, it was just about acceptable for a woman to have had sexual relationships before her marriage, with certain provisos. First, she needed to have been discreet and not too prolific in her pre-marital encounters. However, most importantly, she should not have had any children out of wedlock. This restriction was not for moral reasons. Illegitimate sons could become their father's heirs if he recognized them. Rather, society censored illegitimacy because of the burden it placed on a maternal family, not because it was deemed wrong or shameful. Illegitimate children were the responsibility of the mother's family, and so a burden to it. It was they who ultimately supported the child, even if the father acknowledged his child. He and his family were only obliged to provide 2/3 of its supports. Worse yet, the mother probably lost all hope of marriage, as few men would want to take on the responsibility and expense of another man's child. Thus, her family would lose out further, as she would gain no bride price and no family alliance. Thus, chastity was often the safest bet. For men, sex outside marriage posed no such strictures. They were free to indulge themselves however they pleased, as long as they submitted to marriage in the end. For to remain unmarried in Norse society was unacceptable. A man accused of shunning wedlock was said to be fleeing from the vagina. Women who did the same were fleeing from the penis. Such people risked becoming social outcasts because they were not fulfilling their ultimate role, the procreation of children for the survival of their families and society. Homosexuality was acceptable with limits. Pre-Christian Norse views on homosexuality weren't simple. On the face of it, Norse society accepted sexual relationships between men. However, there were restrictions. Firstly, such relationships could not interfere with any future or current marriage, so the man still had to marry whatever his views on the opposite sex, and his wife had her family had to be prepared to ignore her husband's male lover or lovers. It was most important that the man did not neglect his conjugal duties. He still needed to have sex with his wife. More important was that no free Norseman was the passive partner in a homosexual relationship. Vikings would rape males and females when on raiding trips to shame, degrade and weaken them. To be penetrated was to be submissive. It was acceptable to gain pleasure from penetrating someone, but not from being penetrated yourself. One of the worst insults an enemy could hurl at a Norseman was sworded, penetrated. Any man branded as such would fight to the death to defend his honor. These conflicts led to Scandinavian law codes making such types of insult illegal because of the bloodshed, with the slanderer often outlawed if the injured party didn't kill him first. However, if such abuse was believed or proven, it had grave consequences for the man in question. Although Norse myths tell of gods such as Loki and even Odin taking on a submissive role in sex, Norse mortal society did not tolerate passivity in men. The man in question would become a social outcast branded ergi or unmanly. Such men were believed to lack the ability to be vital in the virile members of society. They were deemed liable to be ineffectual and as fathers and fighters, and as such of no use. Dominant homosexuals were quite another matter. There is no mention of lesbianism in the tales, nor are there any references in other Old Norse texts to female homosexuality. So we cannot gauge pre-Christian attitudes to female homosexuality. However, Icelandic Christian law suggests lesbianism did occur in Norse society in the 12th century. Bishop Porlakr Porlason decreed, "If women satisfy each other, they shall be ordered the same penance as men who perform the most hideous adultery between them or with a quadruped." Some Viking marriage customs survive today. The Norse held their weddings on a Friday, the day of Frigg, the goddess of marriage and fertility. Time of the year was also crucial. Late summer or autumn were the preferred times. This period of the year was harvest time, a time of abundance and plenty. A good supply of meat, fruit and grain was essential to ensure an amply provisioned wedding feast. One beverage was of particular importance, the bridal ale, was first consumed in a loving cup by the bride and groom at the marriage feast. The couple would use the mead-like brew to seal their union with a toast to Odin and Freya. The bridal ale was brewed with a good deal of honey, to ensure the fertility of the newlyweds. The families gifted the couple with enough of this sweet beer to last them a month, a custom that gives us the modern term honeymoon. Before the wedding, both bride and groom took a ritual steam bath. Although they did not wear special clothes for the wedding, both wore specific tokens on their special day. For the bride, this was a floral red upon her head. For the groom it was a sword purposely robbed from one of his family's burial mounds, or an old family sword buried in a fake mound that he ritually disinterred. The sword was presented to the bride at the exchange of vows, as a way of making her a custodian of his family line. As is common today, the bride and groom exchanged rings, both finger rings and arm rings, as they spoke their vows. Once the ceremony was complete, the broodloop occurred. This was a race run by both wedding parties to the feasting hall. Whoever arrived last served the ale, but before the bride could enter, she had to be escorted over the threshold by the groom. The Norse, like many pagan peoples, believed thresholds were dangerous places for in transition to a new stage in their life. The groom would then thrust a new sword, a gift from his bride, into the central pillar of the house. The depth of the resulting cut was used to determine the success of their union. Then, after the feast, 8 witnesses lighted the bridal couple to bed. The groom then removed the bridal wreath from the bride and ritual deflowering before the real event would go down. Viking sexual euphemisms. The Vikings could be quite direct about certain matter. However, they could also be rather coy about sex, or at least so their stories suggest. So the sagas had various ways to refer to sex that described it in rather roundabout a way. A man about to have sex with a woman was said to turn towards her, laying his hand arm tie on her. The rest was up to the audience's imagination. However, what was clear was that the man was in charge. He took the lead, his partner followed. Once the action warmed up, the sagas implied the increased activity in similarly guarded terms. A couple in the throes of passion would crowd together in bed and enjoy each other. If things were particularly raunchy, the tales would describe the man as enjoying a good old rolta amaga, or romp on her belly, or describe the couple as traveling together. Once they had exhausted themselves, the couple spent the aftermath at Hvila med henne, rest with her, or he would amuse oneself. This activity referred to him enjoying a quiet conversation or game of cards with his partner. However, the everyday terms used by Vikings were probably not quite so reserved. Judging by sexual words they have bequeathed to modern times, the Old Norse tvit for a cut of a slit began life as a sexual euphemism for a particular part of female anatomy. Gradually, it evolved into the Old English twat, and later into the more familiar twat, which is used today as a term of abuse. The same occurred with another Old Norse word for the female genitals, kunta. However, not all euphemisms were this crude. In contrast to these rather basic sexual terms, the Old Norse for sexual desire was munut. This word derives from the root word for love, mun, and that of thought or memory hugger, making the sexual impulse a love thought, so perhaps the Vikings could be romantic souls after all. Adultery was acceptable for Viking men, but not their wives. Many Norse men adored their wives, judging by the last words of one man just before he was hung. "Happy am I to have won the joy of such a consort," said the condemned man of his wife. "I shall not go down basely in loneliness to the gods of Tartarus, so let the encircling bonds grip my throat in the midst. The final anguish shall bring with it pleasure only, since the certain hope remains of renewed love, and that shall prove that have its own delights. Each world holds joy, and in the twin regions shall repose of our united souls winds, fame and equal faithfulness in love." Sadly, however, not everyone practiced faithfulness in love. The base requirement of a Norseman was to produce children with his wife. He was not, however, obliged to be faithful. Norsemen could keep concubines known as frills, lower status women who they did not marry and who lived with the man and his wife. According to the Annam of Behmen, a man could keep as many frills as he could afford. Society regarded any children from these licenses as legitimate. Norsemen also kept bed slaves. These unfortunate women had little choice in whether or not to lay with their master, nor was it a great advantage to be the master's favorite. Ibn Fadlan described witnessing a Viking funeral where the favorite bed slave of the deceased man was killed to accompany him to the afterlife. However, the one taboo liaison for a Norseman was to lie with another man's wife. For this, he could be fined or killed. Viking women could divorce their husbands. Viking women may have had to put up with their spouse's affairs, however, they didn't have to put up with their husbands until death. Although a Norse wife could not divorce her husband for being unfaithful, there were other circumstances where it was perfectly acceptable. If her husband hit her, a woman could fine him. If he abused her in front of witnesses, not only did the fine apply, but his wife could divorce him after the third blow. There are also various sexual reasons why a wife could divorce a husband. Men who dressed in feminine clothing such as low-cut shirts, for instance, could be cast off, as could those who were homosexual, even if they were the dominant partner. A wife could object to the lack of discretion in homosexual liaisons, or the attention they distracted from her relationship with her spouse. In each case, the now ex-wife could claim back her original dowry and any inheritance she received during the marriage. And another perhaps surprising reason for divorce was if a man did not satisfy his wife sexually. The least women could expect was a satisfying sex life, and the least we can expect is for you to like and subscribe right now. Also click the video you see on screen now to find out what creepy things were normal for Vikings, because this is only the start.